We often hear stories of heartbreak and destruction when someone crosses paths with a narcissist. These stories are real and they are painful, but what we don't talk about enough is the other side, the rare but powerful moment when the empath, specifically the super empath, not only survives the narcissist, but becomes the one who turns the tables. Let's start by talking about the super empath. This isn't just someone who feels deeply. A super empath has an extraordinary level of emotional intuition. They can walk into a room and feel the undercurrent of energy. They sense what people are feeling before a word is spoken. They don't just see pain in others, they absorb it. But this deep compassion isn't a weakness. In fact, it is their greatest power. Now enter the narcissist. Charismatic, persuasive, and often intoxicating at first, they are masters of manipulation. They know how to mirror exactly what you need to hear, say exactly what makes you feel special, and draw you in with a gravitational pull that feels like love. But it's not love, it's a game of control, it's admiration without depth, it's validation that turns into dependence. And for a while the empath plays along, not because they are weak, but because they believe in people, they believe in potential, they want to help. That is what draws the narcissist in. The super empath is everything they are not. Authentic, self-aware, compassionate. The narcissist sees in the super empath a source of endless validation and emotional fuel. They think they've found the perfect supply, someone who will always forgive, always understand, always stay. But here's what the narcissist doesn't see coming. The moment the super empath wakes up, the moment they stop blaming themselves, the moment they start recognizing the manipulation, the gaslighting, the emotional whiplash, and instead of lashing out, they go quiet, they observe, they detach. See, the super empath doesn't destroy the narcissist by attacking them. That's what the narcissist expects. That's the game they know how to play. What the narcissist cannot handle is silence, is indifference, is being seen without being controlled. When the super empath stops responding, stops reacting, stops feeding the narcissist emotionally, the mask begins to crack. A narcissist thrives off reaction. Praise or rage, it doesn't matter. Attention is fuel. But when the super empath sets boundaries and sticks to them, when they heal and walk away with peace, when they refuse to re-engage in the chaos, the narcissist is left with nothing but themselves, and they can't bear to sit with that emptiness. The destruction doesn't come through revenge, it comes through growth, through healing, through the quiet strength of someone who finally realizes that they were never broken, they were just targeted for their light, and now that they've reclaimed it, nothing can dim it again. In the end, the super empath walks away wiser, stronger, and more connected to their truth. And the narcissist, they are left in the ruins of a false reality, unable to destroy what they no longer control. That is how the story turns. That is how the empath wins. A super empath is someone whose emotional sensitivity goes far beyond what we typically think of when we talk about empathy. They do not just understand the feelings of others, they absorb them, they experience them as if those emotions were their own. They are not simply compassionate or kind-hearted, although they often are. They possess a rare and powerful ability to feel the emotional undercurrents in any situation, to pick up on subtleties others miss, and to sense when something is wrong, even before a word is spoken. This depth of emotional insight makes them incredibly intuitive and often deeply spiritual or reflective by nature. What separates a super empath from someone who is simply empathetic is their energetic awareness. They don't only connect emotionally, they also absorb energy around them, which can be both a gift and a burden. In a healthy environment, they bring peace, connection, and understanding. They naturally uplift others and often serve as the emotional anchor in their relationships. They are the people who friends and family turn to in times of crisis because they listen without judgment, they feel with sincerity, and they respond with wisdom and care. Super empaths are born with this ability, but it is also often shaped by experience. Many of them have lived through hardship, loss, or emotional trauma that sharpened their ability to tune into the emotional world around them. They may have learned early on to read moods, to sense danger, or to comfort others because they were raised in environments where emotional intelligence was necessary for survival. This background gives them a deep well of compassion for others and an even deeper understanding of emotional pain. But this incredible strength can also make them vulnerable, especially to toxic individuals like narcissists who seek to exploit emotional sensitivity for their own gain. A super empath can become a magnet for people who crave attention, validation, and control because the empath gives freely, offers understanding, and sees the good in everyone, including those who do not deserve it. Narcissists are drawn to this energy because it provides them with an endless supply of emotional fuel and attention. At first, the super empath may not even realize they are being manipulated. Their nature is to help, to fix, to heal, and to believe in the best version of a person, so they give and give often at the expense of their own well-being. They try to understand the narcissist's behavior, rationalize their cruelty, and love them through their darkness. But over time, the imbalance becomes undeniable. The empath begins to feel drained, confused, and emotionally destabilized. The very qualities that once made them feel powerful, now feel like liabilities. However, what makes a super empath truly powerful is their ability to awaken. Once they recognize the pattern of emotional abuse, once they name the manipulation and the gaslighting, once they begin to see that their love is being weaponized against them, something shifts. They begin to reclaim their boundaries. They start to remember who they are underneath the conditioning. They stop internalizing blame and instead shine a light on the truth. And when a super empath reaches this stage, they become a force that the narcissist cannot control. A super empath who has stepped into their awareness is unstoppable, because now their sensitivity is no longer a weakness, it is their guide. Their boundaries become firm, their voice becomes clear, and their presence becomes rooted in truth, not in fear. They stop reacting and start observing. They detach not out of coldness, but out of self-respect and clarity. And in doing so, they expose the narcissist's greatest fear, being truly seen by someone who is no longer under their spell. The super empath does not destroy by force, they destroy by awakening, by reclaiming their power, by rising in self-love, and by refusing to be a source of fuel for someone else's dysfunction. Their healing becomes the narcissist's unraveling, not because they set out to cause harm, but because their light is no longer available for the narcissist to dim. To understand the narcissist, you must first step beyond the surface charm and confidence they so often display, because what you see on the outside is rarely what exists within. Narcissists wear masks. They build false identities, carefully crafted to gain admiration, control, and power. They are often charismatic, persuasive, and seemingly confident, but behind the mask lies a deep emptiness, a fragile sense of self, and an insatiable hunger for external validation. A narcissist does not truly know who they are. Their self-worth is entirely dependent on how others see them, so they build identities based on status, attention, and control. Their behavior is not driven by genuine connection, but by a need to feed the false self they have constructed. They seek constant reinforcement through praise, admiration, obedience, or even fear. If you challenge their view of themselves, if you stop playing the role they assigned you, they react with rage or manipulation, because in their mind, your resistance is a direct attack on their survival. Most narcissists operate with a deeply rooted fear of inadequacy and shame, though they would never admit it to anyone, not even to themselves. They are emotionally immature, regardless of their age. Their inability to take accountability for their actions or empathize with others is not because they do not know right from wrong, it is because they genuinely cannot tolerate the discomfort of being wrong or vulnerable. In their world, they are always the victim, always the hero, or always the one in control, and when any part of that narrative is threatened, they strike back. One of the most dangerous aspects of narcissistic behavior is their capacity for manipulation. They are masters at twisting reality. They will use charm and flattery to draw you in, then slowly begin to undermine your confidence through subtle criticism, blame shifting, and gaslighting. They will rewrite the story to suit their needs. They will deny saying things they clearly said. They will accuse you of being too sensitive or unstable. They will turn your every emotional reaction into proof that you are the problem. The goal is always the same: to destabilize you emotionally so they can remain in control. Narcissists do not build relationships, they build power dynamics. They see others not as equal partners, but as tools, extensions of themselves, or sources of narcissistic supply, which is a term used to describe the attention, admiration, or emotional energy they feed on. At first they may seem intensely affectionate, attentive, and loving, but this idealization phase is only temporary. Once they believe they have secured your loyalty, they begin the devaluation phase, where they subtly erode your sense of worth and create a reality where you depend on them for approval and identity. They use confusion to control. They will give you just enough kindness to keep you hopeful, just enough affection to keep you longing for the version of them you first met, but the truth is that version never truly existed. It was a mask, a projection designed to hook you. Once the narcissist feels secure in the relationship, the mask slips more and more, and the emotional abuse escalates. The narcissist fears one thing above all: exposure. The moment someone sees through the act and no longer plays the part they designed, the narcissist begins to panic, because without your belief in their false self, they are left to face their own emotional emptiness, and that is something they will do anything to avoid. That is why they smear former partners, why they lie to mutual friends, why they desperately try to win you back after you leave, not out of love, but out of a need to reassert control. Understanding the narcissist is not about excusing their behavior, it is about recognizing the game you have been pulled into, and understanding that it was never your fault. You cannot fix them, you cannot love them into being whole, because their wounds are buried beneath layers of denial and ego protection. The only true power you have is the power to see clearly, to stop feeding the illusion, and to reclaim your energy for yourself, because once you understand the narcissist, you can finally stop internalizing the pain they caused, and start healing from it. The attraction dynamic between a super empath and a narcissist is one of the most intense, magnetic, and ultimately destructive connections that can occur between two people. It is not rooted in love or compatibility, but rather in psychological wiring, unmet needs, and energetic patterns that create a powerful yet toxic bond. At first glance, it can look like destiny, the kind of connection that feels electric, fated, even spiritual, but beneath the surface, it is a dynamic built on imbalance, illusion, and emotional exploitation. When a super empath and a narcissist first meet, the chemistry is undeniable. The narcissist is often charming, confident, and engaging. They know how to make someone feel seen, wanted, and special. They say all the right things, and they mirror the desires and values of the empath to an uncanny degree. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate strategy. The narcissist quickly studies their target, learning how to present themselves as the answer to every unspoken hope and wound. The empath, who is naturally open, trusting, and deeply in tune with emotional energy, feels this connection intensely and mistakes it for genuine intimacy. For the empath, the narcissist initially appears to be someone who truly understands them, someone who matches their depth, someone who finally sees their worth. The narcissist showers them with attention, affection, and validation during what is often called the love bombing phase. This phase is intoxicating because it activates the empath's desire to connect, heal, and be understood. The empath feels alive, needed, and important, and because they are wired to give, they begin to invest more and more of themselves into the relationship without realizing that the foundation being built is one-sided. The narcissist is drawn to the empath for very different reasons. They are not attracted to the empath's soul or heart in a meaningful way. They are attracted to the empath's light, to their emotional energy, their compassion, and their willingness to give. Narcissists crave control and attention, and the empath becomes the perfect supply source, someone who will validate them, support them, and absorb the emotional aftermath of their toxic behavior without immediate resistance. The empath is seen not as a partner but as a means to maintain the narcissist's fragile ego. As the relationship deepens, the dynamic begins to shift subtly and then dramatically. The narcissist begins to test boundaries, withdrawing affection, creating confusion, and using manipulation tactics to maintain dominance. The empath often responds with more effort, more love, more understanding, believing that their patience and loyalty will bring back the idealized version of the partner they first met. This is where the empath's gifts become their vulnerability. They tolerate far more than they should because they see the pain behind the narcissist's behavior. They believe they can help fix it, and they hold on to hope. This dynamic becomes a cycle. The narcissist devalues and controls the empath, while the empath works harder to heal and hold the relationship together. The more the narcissist withdraws or criticizes, the more the empath self-reflects, tries to adjust, and questions their own worth. This imbalance feeds the narcissist's need for power and validation, while draining the empath of their emotional and spiritual energy. It is a bond built on the illusion of love, but held together by control, fear, and emotional dependence. But the attraction was never truly mutual. It was asymmetrical from the beginning. The empath was attracted to connection and meaning, while the narcissist was attracted to control and supply. The empath gave love, the narcissist took it and turned it into a weapon, and yet because of the emotional intensity and the highs and lows, this connection often becomes addictive for the empath, making it even harder to recognize and leave. Understanding this attraction dynamic is essential to breaking the cycle. It is not about blaming oneself for falling into the trap. It is about recognizing that the very traits that make a super empath extraordinary can also make them susceptible to emotional predators. Once this awareness sets in, the dynamic begins to shift, because once the empath awakens and reclaims their power, the narcissist loses their grip and the illusion begins to crumble. The turning point in the dynamic between a super empath and a narcissist is one of the most pivotal and life-altering moments in the entire journey. It does not usually come as a single event, but rather as a slow building of awareness, a layering of realizations, a growing sense that something is fundamentally broken and cannot be repaired. It is not always a loud or dramatic rupture. Sometimes it is a quiet shift, deep within the empath, a moment when their soul simply says enough, even if their mind has not yet caught up. This turning point often follows months or even years of emotional exhaustion, confusion, and inner conflict. The super empath has likely spent countless hours questioning themselves, trying to make sense of the narcissist's ever-changing moods, their cycles of love and cruelty, their manipulations and gaslighting. The empath has tried harder than most people would have. They have forgiven what others would have walked away from. They have adapted, compromised, and explained away behavior behaviors that slowly chipped away at their self-worth and inner peace. But something begins to change. The empath starts to notice patterns that no longer make sense. No matter how much they try to rationalize them, they begin to remember who they were before the relationship, the strength they once had, the clarity they used to feel. They start to see how far they have drifted from themselves. They recognize that they are constantly walking on eggshells, monitoring their words and actions, trying to avoid the next outburst or silent treatment, and realizing that no matter how much they give, it is never enough. The turning point is not always sparked by a massive betrayal, although that can happen sometimes. It is the simple realization that they are tired of giving without receiving, tired of defending themselves against accusations that have no basis, tired of shrinking themselves to avoid conflict, tired of sacrificing their own needs for someone who shows no interest in meeting them halfway. It is the moment when the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving. At this stage, the empath's perception begins to shift. They stop seeing the narcissist as someone broken to be saved and start seeing them as someone who is actively harming them. They begin to understand that love does not hurt like this, that love is not supposed to feel like fear, confusion, and chronic anxiety. They realize that they are not crazy, overly sensitive, or the source of the chaos. They begin to remember that they have value beyond how they are treated, that they are worthy of love, that is consistent, kind, and reciprocal. This is often when the empath starts to detach emotionally. They may still be physically present, but the connection has changed. The power the narcissist once held begins to weaken because it relied entirely on the empath's belief in the illusion. And now that the illusion is fading, the narcissist starts to lose control. The empath stops reacting the way they used to, stops feeding into the drama, stops explaining themselves endlessly, stops taking responsibility for things that were never theirs to carry in the first place. The narcissist usually senses this change and may escalate their tactics. They may try to love bomb again to pull the empath back in, or they may increase the abuse hoping that fear will re-establish control. But for the empath who has reached the turning point, something inside has shifted permanently. The old tricks do not work the same way. The desire to please is overshadowed by the need for peace. The longing for connection is replaced by a yearning for freedom. The turning point is painful, because it often comes with grief, not only for what was lost, but for what never truly existed. It is the moment the empath starts to accept that the person they loved was a mask, a projection, not the real version of the narcissist, but an image carefully crafted to manipulate and control. And while this truth can feel devastating, it is also profoundly liberating, because from this moment forward, the empath is no longer trapped in illusion. They are standing in reality, and from here real healing can finally begin. The power of the empath, especially the super empath, is not always seen at first because it does not come wrapped in loudness or force. It does not demand attention or command a room with dominance. Instead, it lives quietly beneath the surface in emotional depth, in unwavering intuition, and in the ability to feel what others often cannot even acknowledge in themselves. For much of the relationship with a narcissist, this power is buried or redirected, used to heal, fix, and understand someone who has no intention of reciprocating. But when the empath begins to turn inward, when they begin to reclaim what they gave away so freely, this power begins to surface in ways that even the narcissist cannot control. One of the greatest strengths of the empath is their ability to see beyond appearances. They see energy, they feel intention, and they can sense when someone's words do not match their actions, even when they cannot yet explain it. They know when something is off. For much of their time with a narcissist, they may have ignored these instincts out of love or hope or fear, but the empath's intuition never truly disappears. It only lies dormant, waiting for the moment when it will be heard again. Once the empath begins to trust themselves, instead of the narcissist's version of reality, they step into a power that cannot be faked or taken away. Another key element of the empath's power is their emotional resilience. While they may feel deeply and get hurt easily, they also heal with depth. They don't rush through their pain, they process it, they learn from it, they transform it, and when they have finally decided to walk away from the narcissist, they do so not just to escape the hurt, but to reclaim their soul. This process may be long and painful, but it is also profoundly strengthening, because through that healing, the empath reconnects with their own identity, their values, their voice. The empath's power is also rooted in authenticity. While the narcissist hides behind masks and facades, the empath learns to live in truth, not perform it. They begin to speak without apologizing for their emotions. They begin to say no without guilt. They start to choose themselves, even when it feels unfamiliar or difficult. They no longer allow the narcissist's needs to take precedence over their own peace, and the moment they begin to set boundaries, not from anger, but from clarity, the entire dynamic changes, because boundaries are something a narcissist
narcissist cannot control or manipulate once they are truly established. The most threatening thing to a narcissist is someone who sees through them and no longer reacts to them, and this is exactly what happens when the empath awakens to their power. The narcissist feeds on emotional reactions, whether positive or negative. They rely on the empath's confusion, guilt, or fear to stay relevant. But once the empath becomes emotionally detached, once they begin to observe instead of absorb, once they choose silence over explanation, the narcissist begins to lose their grip, not because the empath is attacking them, but because the empath is no longer playing the game. The empath's power also lies in their capacity for growth. While narcissists are stuck in cycles of self-preservation and denial, empaths evolve. They use their experiences to deepen their understanding of themselves. They rise from trauma not with bitterness but with wisdom. They take what was meant to break them and build a stronger self from the pieces. And this transformation is not just a survival, it is a form of quiet rebellion, a statement that says I will no longer abandon myself for someone who benefits from my self-betrayal. In the end, the empath's true power is not in how much they can give, but in how firmly they can stand in their own light. It is in their ability to feel and to choose how to respond. It is in their decision to love without losing themselves. It is in their unwavering return to authenticity. And once they reclaim that, once they stop giving their power away to people who only want to
consume it, the narcissist becomes powerless because nothing is more destructive to a narcissist than being seen without being able to control what is seen. Silent detachment and boundaries are among the most powerful tools a super empath can wield in the final stages of breaking free from a narcissist's control. They do not come from a place of revenge or bitterness, but from clarity, peace, and a profound reclaiming of personal power. These two forces operate quietly beneath the surface, yet their impact is undeniable. They represent the empath's shift from reaction to response, from being consumed by the narcissist's chaos to being centered in their own calm. This moment is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is not a declaration made in anger. It is a quiet knowing that nothing more needs to be explained, justified, or fixed. For much of the relationship, the empath has been engaged in an emotional tug-of-war, constantly pulled in and pushed away, trying to earn love, trying to be understood, trying to restore a sense of connection that was never truly mutual. The narcissist thrived on this dynamic, feeding off the empath's emotional investment, the arguments, the tears, the attempts to reason or make things right each time. The empath reacted. The narcissist felt a surge of power, a reminder that they were still in control, still significant, still capable of bending another person's emotional world to their will. But silent detachment breaks that cycle. It is not simply walking away, it is withdrawing the energy the narcissist once depended on. It is a quiet refusal to engage in the dysfunction. It is when the empath no longer feels the need to explain themselves, to plead their case, or to convince the narcissist of their worth. The empath has come to understand that nothing they say will ever change the narcissist behavior, because the narcissist was never listening with the intention to grow. They were only ever listening to find a way to maintain control. In this silence, the narcissist begins to unravel, because the very source of their supply has gone dry. Without emotional reactions, without the empath's participation in the blame shifting or drama, the narcissist is left with themselves, and that is a reality they cannot tolerate. They may escalate their tactics, trying to provoke a response. They may attempt to hoover the empath back in through love bombing, manipulation, or guilt. But the empath who has truly detached sees it for what it is and does not respond, not because they are cold or heartless, but because they finally understand that their peace is not worth sacrificing for someone else's dysfunction. Boundaries are the natural companion to silent detachment. They are not walls to keep people out. They are doors with locks that the empath controls. They are statements of self-respect and self-protection. Boundaries say, I choose what I allow into my space. I decide what I will tolerate. I determine what kind of energy I want around me. And this is where the empath begins to thrive. Instead of being drained by constant giving, they become energized by protecting their space. Instead of being consumed by someone else's emotional chaos, they learn to center themselves and honor their own emotional needs. Setting boundaries is difficult at first, especially for someone who has spent years being conditioned to believe that their needs are selfish or that saying no is a form of betrayal. But with each boundary enforced, the empath grows stronger. They begin to see that they do not owe anyone unlimited access to their mind, their heart, or their energy. They realize that love is not proven by how much suffering they are willing to endure, but by how much they are willing to protect their inner peace. Eventually, silent detachment and strong boundaries become a way of life, not just a strategy for surviving a narcissist, but a philosophy for all relationships. The empath no longer seeks validation from those who cannot give it. They no longer explain themselves to those who twist their words. They no longer abandon themselves to be accepted by others. They choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and truth over illusion. And in doing so, they finally become free, not just from the narcissist, but from every version of themselves that was shaped by that pain. The silence becomes sacred, the boundaries become powerful, and the empath becomes untouchable. The aftermath of ending a relationship with a narcissist is a complicated emotional landscape that can be difficult to explain to anyone who has not experienced it firsthand. It is not simply a matter of relief or freedom, though those feelings do come in time. It is instead a mixture of grief, confusion, emotional numbness, and deep inner exhaustion. It is waking up from a psychological fog and slowly realizing how much of yourself you lost in the process of trying to love someone who only ever used that love as leverage. It is discovering that your heart, your thoughts, your boundaries, and even your identity were bent around a person who never truly saw you beyond how you could serve their needs. In the beginning, the silence feels unfamiliar. The space once occupied by chaos is now open and still, but that quiet can be deafening. The super empath, who gave so much, who tried so hard, who carried the emotional weight of the entire relationship, now sits with the emptiness, and that emptiness can feel unbearable at first, because the narcissist had become the center of everything. Every thought, every reaction, every decision had revolved around them. Now, without their voice, their demands, their manipulations, the empath is left with their own voice, and that voice has been quieted for far too long. There is also grief, a profound kind of grief that does not stem from what was lost, but from realizing what never truly existed. The love the narcissist gave was conditional, performative, and manipulative. It was love only in appearance, not in substance. The empath must mourn the fantasy they held on to, the potential they believed in, the version of the narcissist they kept hoping would return once things got better. This grief is layered with disillusionment, the kind that comes when truth finally replaces illusion, and that truth can hurt more than the abuse itself, because it makes it impossible to go back. In the aftermath, many empaths struggle with guilt and shame. They question themselves over and over. Why didn't I leave sooner? Why did I allow this to go on for so long? How could I not see it clearly? They beat themselves up for the kindness they offered, for the loyalty they gave, for the boundaries they bent. But healing begins when they understand that these qualities were never weaknesses. They were expressions of their depth and their heart, and those things are never something to be ashamed of. The real issue was not their empathy, it was the narcissist's exploitation of it. There is also fear, fear of being manipulated again, fear of repeating the pattern, fear of not trusting one's own judgment, because the narcissist made them doubt everything, including their own instincts and reality. Rebuilding that trust in oneself is one of the hardest but most important steps in healing. The empath must learn to listen to their inner voice again, to honor their boundaries without guilt, to believe that their perception is valid and that their needs matter. This takes time and patience, because emotional abuse leaves invisible wounds that cannot be rushed. But slowly the pieces begin to come back together. The empath begins to rediscover parts of themselves that were buried, their creativity, their joy, their sense of peace. They begin to notice how different their body feels without constant stress, how much more space they have to think and breathe and simply be. They start to experience life without the emotional highs and lows, without the tension of walking on eggshells, without the pressure of trying to fix what they did not break, and that difference, while subtle at first, becomes profound. Eventually the aftermath transforms into rebirth. The empath emerges not broken but wiser, not bitter but stronger. They carry scars, yes, but those scars become reminders of their strength, of what they overcame and what they will never accept again. They begin to attract healthier connections rooted in respect and authenticity, and they learn to love themselves with the same intensity they once poured into others. And in that space, the narcissist's hold over them dissolves completely, because now the empath is not just surviving, they are thriving, and nothing is more powerful than that. In the end, this journey from entanglement with a narcissist to the awakening of the super empath is not just a story of pain, it is a story of power reclaimed and identity restored. It is about remembering who you were before the manipulation, the gaslighting, the emotional chaos, and stepping back into that truth with a strength that is deeper, wiser, and unshakable. It is about realizing that your sensitivity was never your weakness, it was your greatest gift, and your ability to love deeply, your capacity to heal, your instinct to understand were never flaws, they were reflections of your light. Leaving a narcissist is not a single act, it is a process. It is a return to self, a peeling away of illusion, a confrontation with wounds and false narratives, and it takes incredible courage to walk through that darkness, to stand up not only to the abuser, but also to the parts of yourself that kept hoping for change, that kept settling for crumbs, that kept believing love meant sacrifice. But once you walk through that fire, once you say no more with your energy, with your silence, with your boundaries, everything changes. The narcissist may try to reclaim your attention, but your power lies in your refusal to participate in the story anymore. The super empath does not destroy
destroy the narcissist through revenge or retaliation. They do it by healing, by rising, by becoming untouchable in their truth. The narcissist's greatest fear is irrelevance, and nothing makes them more irrelevant than the silence of the one who once fed their ego with empathy. That silence is louder than any scream. It is final, it is freedom. And so to every super empath who has walked this path or is walking it now, know this: your heart is not too much, your emotions are not too deep, your love is not misplaced. You were simply giving it to someone who could never receive it in a healthy way. But that chapter is closed, and what comes next is a life not built around survival but around self-love, self-respect and genuine connection. You did not lose yourself, you were never lost, you were only buried under the weight of someone else's brokenness, and now you are free. This is not the end, it is your beginning, and from this point on you do not just live, you rise.